much. This is the second NK Memorial Lecture in this year's conference. Professor Arijit of University of New South Wales will be chairing the session, and our distinguished speaker is Professor Arijit from Calcutta. So I hand over the session to Arijit, please. Yes, you also please come so that we can quickly felicitate both of you and get the session started.
Sure. Thank you.
So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Orko Ghosh, former student of this university. It's my pleasure to welcome you to Nirmal Kanti Majumdar lecture for 2025. This must have been said before, but I will say it again. Professor Majumdar was a distinguished student and later a much admired teacher of political science, former Presidency College. And just like all the great teachers that we have encountered, he was a rare combination of eminent scholar and deeply committed teacher. We're also grateful to Professor Majumdar, who was probably here yesterday, his son, for his continued association with the lecture series. Majumdar himself is Emeritus Professor of Economics at Cornell, distinguished alumnus of this department, and an eminent economic theorist by himself, who works on dynamic stochastic economies and more generally about growth models. So I think given Professor Nirmal Majumdar's deep interest in political science and Professor Majumdar's distinguished contributions to economic theory, it's I think particularly fitting that today's plenary speaker is Professor Arijit from the Indian Institute of Management of Calcutta, an economic theorist, but whose work speaks directly to questions at the intersection of many fields, economics, political science, and more broadly social sciences. So Professor Sen works in applied microeconomic theory and applied game theory. He was trained naturally here at the Presidency and went to the Delhi School of Economics and after that to Princeton. I was talking to him about one of his earlier papers that came out in American Economic Review, but he has also published in leading journals including AER and International Economic Review. So today's lecture, and this is what I could gather from abstract, and so we hear more from Professor Sen. It studies the dynamic assimilation of minority groups into a mainstream economy. So motivated by the sociological literature on segmented assimilation and empirical evidence on rising inequality with minority groups, the paper develops a multi-generation dynamic model with endogenous cultural choice and occupational sorting between minority and mainstream economies. There's a lot in the paper. I'll not take any more time from Professor Sen, so without further ado, it's my great pleasure to invite Professor Arijit Sen to deliver the Nirmal Kanti Majumdar lecture, Segmented Assimilation, a Minority's Dilemma.
Thank you.
The clicker.
Yeah. My first question is, can you hear me if I don't stand over there?
Yes,
I
sure.
presume you can. So that's a great advantage. My next little disappointment, never mind, is that there isn't a blackboard. I was sort of planning to scribble a little bit, but never mind, I'll manage. Okay, so this is joint work with, I don't want to start this. This is joint work with Anuj Bhowik at the Indian Statistical Institute. And what we are trying to do is to write down a theoretical model which explains heterogeneous assimilation pathways of different minority groups in different countries and assimilation with respect to assimilating with the mainstream. So that's the objective. to talk about the heterogeneity, and then to study the impact of that heterogeneity on minority welfare. So starting with a very banal statement which says that in many countries various minorities reside alongside the mainstream population, and from very far away from home to closer to home, if you think about it, there are the African Americans, the Latin Americans, the Native Americans in the US, the Aborigines of Australia, South Asians and Caribbeans in the UK, Palestinians in Israel, and then you can come closer to us. The color coding for my storytelling is not important, but I want to emphasize the color coding. What I want to emphasize is not all minorities are the same kind of minorities. Some are, oops, sorry, what did I do? How do I do the pointer in the middle? Some are forced migrants, some are voluntary migrants, and some are the original indigenous population of the country. And that heterogeneity might speak to assimilation processes as well, even though we don't sort of focus on that heterogeneity virtually at all in the modeling of this. So, in all of these cases, lots of regressions have been run, which basically say that if a minority picks up the mainstream language very well, there are substantial economic returns from doing that. So assimilation pays. And that may be one of the reasons why there is significant assimilation over time. But even though assimilation pays, a question remains that is this assimilation very straightforward, very monotonic? In other words, give them 10 years, half of them would have assimilated, give them another 5, 20% more would have assimilated. Does it work that way? The early sociological literature in the 1930s about assimilation in the United States of migrants and, well, the endogenous population was thrown out, so we won't talk about the assimilation of the endogenous population. But at least for the migrants, the answer apparently was yes, there is evidence of monotonic assimilation. Give them time and they will all assimilate. The point is that that idea was subsequently debated, and a new sociological theory emerged which says that it's not the case that we can expect assimilation to be that homogeneous. One big difference, 1930s, I am talking about white European assimilation into the United States. 1990s, we are talking about a very different kind of population trying to assimilate with the mainstream. So it's not surprising that the outcomes were different. So the classical theory said, yes, there is monotonic assimilation. And later some researchers said, maybe not. And this quote is very important for me because this is the starting point of our model. Maybe some minority peoples have fragmented in the assimilation process, with some fragments having assimilated with the mainstream. Actually, there's a key word there which I've skipped, I don't know why. Assimilated upwards with the mainstream. So there's a real sort of value judgment there. Assimilated upwards with the mainstream, and other fragments have assimilated downwards into a minority underclass and turned their backs to the mainstream. This is the theory of segmented assimilation. Alejandro Cortés at Princeton and a bunch of co-authors. And then this started in 1990s, but lots of other sociologists picked it up. And you have now a large, diverse set of people writing on segmented assimilation, and they are also writing diverse things, which I want to emphasize. Most of it is in the context of Latin American immigrants to the US in the last 70 years. Now, if you look at the heterogeneity of the writing in segmented assimilation theory, 2 points sort of stand out, and they stood out to us. Firstly, an acknowledgement that the experience is diverse. There isn't a significant homogeneity in the experience of assimilation. And secondly, the notion of that fragmentation that I talked about earlier. Sometimes different immigrant segments assimilated in a fragmented manner, and then the same quote as before, but now I have the upward and the downward in there because I've put it in quotes. So I'm required to put that in. We thought that this is worth a model to be written down. Okay. Maybe because that's what we love doing. We also thought that why do you keep on talking about immigrants? What about the different religious groups in India? Different ethnic groups in the South Asian subcontinent? Can't we talk about their assimilation? And we can. And maybe that's also heterogeneous and segmented in similar ways that these guys are talking about. So we want to make the ambit of the question, the research question, a little bit larger. Our view is that the relevance of segmented assimilation theory, okay, this segmented versus fragmented is going to bug you quite a lot for the next 40 minutes, so let me make it very clear what I mean by the two words. When I talk about the segmented assimilation theory, I imply both these recognitions, the diversity and the fragmentation. And when I talk about fragmentation, I only refer to the fragmentation. Okay. That, no big deal, but I do it that way. Okay, before I get to that. So it might explain experiences of voluntary as well as involuntary and indigenous minority populations in a country. So maybe this idea that they are looking at it from Latin American immigration to the US, but other people might look at it from a slightly different lenses. And the second thing which is of standalone interest to me, and some people have disparately done this, see, whenever you see heterogeneity in the population, the tendency is to ask, what is the Hindu Gini versus the Muslim Gini? What is the sort of the one subculture Gini as opposed to the another? What these guys are looking at is the minority Gini worsening at a faster rate than the mainstream Gini? So within the group, how is inequality changing? Now that is relevant for us because if you believe in this assimilating upwards and assimilating downwards and both happening at the same time, that's exactly what you would expect if you looked at a number for the group. Not comparing the means across groups, but just for looking at the number within the group. And we're sort of very happy that the evidence is sort of what we would think it to be. So this is a 2005 book where I found the following sentence. Gini for African American families rose from 0.375 to 0.482 in 66 to 93. The white rise was less. The Hill report about the UK, and this is a word statement here, rise in inequality over 1980 to 2010 has been mostly due to growing inequality within social groups. Differences in outcomes between the more and the less advantaged within each social group are much greater than the differences across groups. And the last one is actually another validation of the first one. This is a relatively recent study in Pew, which says that between 1970 and 2016, the rise in income inequality within African American, Asian, and Hispanic ethnic groups in the US has been much higher than that of the white population. Now, motivated by all of this stuff, the writings on segmented assimilation by the sociologists and this kind of empirical evidence, we want to formally, at this stage theoretically, study different pathways through which minorities in a landmass, in some landmass, it could be a city, it could be a country, it could be something in between, culturally and economically assimilate with the mainstream, and the impact of such assimilation on minority welfare. You could also ask about impact on the mainstream welfare. We haven't done that. Our mainstream has been black boxed in a very sort of simplified way so that we can focus predominantly on the minority. At this point, I am going to jump into the model. I should talk about the literature and our relation to it. If I start on that path, I'll never finish, so I won't talk about it. I'll simply say we learn from and aim to contribute to a large social economics literature on culture, transmission, assimilation, so on and so forth. The names are Alberto Bissin, Thierry Verdier, Yves Zenou, and their numerous co-authors. That's the set which works on this stuff. But luckily they haven't talked about segmented assimilation. As yet, who the hell knows? Yeah. Okay, so our terrain of analysis is a landmass with two peoples and two economies, the mainstream and the minority. We would allow the minority to be heterogeneous. For simplicity, we take the mainstream to be homogeneous. I have very bad days in terms of dry mouth. That sort of eats me up a little bit. Okay. So I thought it would be clarifying if I first looked at this landmass in which I spent some time of my life. It's a very peculiar city. It's not unique in any regard. But the city is very segregated. There's a road called the 16th Street which goes down from the top of the city to, well, it went down, this I can't give up. It went down to the East Wing. I guess it will go down to the Great Ballroom or whatever the hell it is now going to be called. And there are two different bits of cities on either side of 16th Street. It's going down a little bit. It's homogenizing a little bit, but it's still starkly different. And the one thing that I want to emphasize is that you could talk about residential segregation. You could talk about all kinds of segregation over here. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to say that, look, my interest is a mainstream population, and I'll call them a Caucasian mainstream, and a culturally heterogeneous non-Caucasian minority, predominantly African American, but that's also changing over time. There's a residential segregation, that's not my focus. My focus is, are these two sets of people working in two different economies, or do their economies overlap? That's my question. So what I'm going to say is that there is this mainstream economy and there's this minority economy. No mainstream person goes and works in the minority economy, or even if they do, that's minuscule. But there's a heterogeneity among the non-Caucasian minority. Slightly more and more people over time work over here than they used to earlier. All of this got started in my head, and I'm wasting time, but I really like to say this. So I used to stay at the top of that yellow line. And I pretty much rarely went there, but my workplace was somewhere here, so I had to drive through. Now I've forgotten what I wanted to say. Do I remember what I wanted to say? What was the last thing I said?
How it all started.
Oh, actually, that wasn't the last thing that I said, but I'm grateful you said that, because that's let's forget about my experiences, how it all started. I want to emphasize the source of the heterogeneity, that why is the minority heterogeneous? Because one of the reasons you get that agglomeration of minority over there is after the slaves were freed. One of the places that slaves from different parts of the country went to was the capital. Okay? So you do have African Americans, but they're not necessarily all identical to each other. And the thing that I'm going to play upon is that Some are more traditional, some are more orthodox than others. There's a sort of a heterogeneity in their culture traits. How deeply rooted am I to the ethnicity from which I emerged? Or how flexible am I trying to make myself be? And that's going to make a difference in our model. So,
Sorry, can I ask you?
yes, 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 yes.
So, back to that point, around the fact that you have potential residential sort of
But that I completely
labor market, and then on the consumer side, which shops I go to, which stores I go to. So it's just labor market.
It's just a labor market. It's where I earn my money. But of course, that will be tied to my access to better shops. So I'll say, so the gains from going to the urban economy, the white economy, I just write it down as something that only depends on the fact that I get higher wages. But it need not only be higher wages, there can be lots of other benefits, which is sort of in that function, but I have. Okay. And I'll talk about this decision as to should I try and go a bit closer to the mainstream culture before I think of acquiring a mainstream job. I'll talk about the potential minority culture assimilation to be a precursor to the economic assimilation, and I'll explain that. And as I said before, we'll have nothing to say about residential segregation versus integration. So it can very well be that we are two neighbors in the black economy. I work only in the black economy and my neighbor works in the white economy. Perfect. I'm not ruling that out in any way. Okay, so then from the nice picture to these horrible lines. So I have two economies, the minority economy V and the mainstream economy C. V is the village, C is the city. And the minority are heterogeneous. And I'm simply saying that if you are very close to position number one, you're a very traditional person, you are very orthodox, you don't want to give up on your language nuances that easily to pick up the other guy's accents. I don't want to do that. The guys who are towards capital P are much more quote unquote liberal. I will then allow for a little bit of an endogenous movement. So having been born somewhere, you can choose either to move left or to move right culturally. I could go back to my ethnicity if I so wanted to, or move away from it, just by a little bit, not by too much, just by a little bit, if that's sort of in my preferences. Okay. This is an infinite generation model, but then you guys are going to sort of shoot me in the head because I'm going to assume myopia. So I say, what's the point? But there's still a point of an infinite generation. There's still a point of an infinite generation. So the way I think about the generations, the very first generation, okay, the very first generation, all minority is born here. So what is this? This is an empty space waiting to be filled up over generations. And the huge mass of the mainstream people are right there at the end, at one corner. Okay. So we are born, and then, and I have two locations to worry about. I can be born in one location and I can work in another location. So my livelihood location and my birth location need not necessarily be the same. This is the hardest part of the model to explain. So let me, and then you can sort of jump over from the minority economy to the mainstream economy only in terms of working and getting better remuneration. See, this is the way to think about it. First generation, all the minority is born here. Some orthodox, some less orthodox, that's it. And if this second landmass was not there, they would work only here. And how would they work? They would work in an informal economy, basically bilateral trading. Now, why do I assume bilateral? I don't need bilateral trading. What I do need is that personal contact between people would feed into your production process and therefore your consumption process. So if people are close to you, culturally close to you, your economic returns improve. And then you might make an effort to be culturally close to each other. In other words, if this economy did not exist, you would expect in our model an agglomeration of culture. Okay? Because the closer we come towards each other. Now, agglomeration at which point? I don't know that. Initial conditions will determine that. Okay? But there'll be a force towards agglomeration. But of course, now the new landmass has come up. So a new thing happens. I am born, let's say, in the second position. There is a new economy where I might end up with some probability. Recognizing that, I ask myself, which way should I culturally assimilate? Closer to my ethnic brethren or a bit closer to the mainstream economy? What's the catch? The catch is the mainstream economy job is not guaranteed. So I move closer and then I'm left in the lurch. So I ask myself that if I don't get the mainstream job, I would wish to be closer to my ethnic neighbors. And my ethnic neighbors, by the structure of the model, are farther away from the mainstream. That's precisely why they didn't get the jobs either. So it's that dichotomy that we will play with and say the following. In a typical generation, a continuum of minority members are born at different minority culture positions in V and in C. So the moment I say V and in C, I'm implicitly assuming some years have gone by. Originally, they were only in V. Now some people have moved towards the city culture, therefore received a job, therefore jumped over. And that's why these minority positions in V and C become relevant. And they can have distinct birth locations and livelihood locations. They may be born in V and work in C. Can they be born in C and work in V? In principle, why not? But we don't allow for it in the main model. Subsequently, we discussed robustness, that that's not going to happen for certain scenarios. Minority members born in V/C get a chance to culture shift, move to an adjacent position from one position by one step in either direction. So if I'm born somewhere there, I get a chance stochastically to either go one step this way or one step that way. This way would be merging myself a little bit more with the ethnic group. That step would be moving away from it. After that culture shift is over, each minority member gets a chance to jump to C. But that chance to jump to C, that probability, is increasing in your position. So this guy has a lousy chance of getting to C, but this guy has a much better chance of getting to C. Okay. And the crux of the matter when I run through the model is really this choice. And this is where the minority dilemma is, and I want to write this down explicitly. Okay, no, I'm going to write it down in the next slide. Okay. Okay. Basically, let me say that because I've mentioned it. Ignore all of this. Come to this last statement. So if I'm born over here at a culture position which is close to P, I will culture shift right. That will be my basic instinct to improve my C job chance. But if I'm born distant from P, closer to 1, I might want to culture shift left to stay close to those minority peers who are more likely to remain behind in the village economy. That's the tension that we'll be playing. And that tension is motivated by these two pair functions, which are extremely obvious and simple. If I am in the village, sitting at a position P, and the village culture distribution over P equal to 1 to P equal to capital P is mu. That's the village culture distribution. Then what matters to me is two things. The mass of the population in the village and what is the dispersion of this mass relative to me. What is the cultural dispersion of this mass relative to me? That is the dp mu function. I haven't written it down. It's just summation distance times measure. The more the distance between me and that guy, the more costly is it, and more there are people at that position, the more costly. So it could be non-linear, but we've just taken a linear specification. It's the difference times summation, that dispersion, and summation of all of that. That's the dispersion measure. What happens in the city? In the city, three things happen. Firstly, you get a higher chance to be called if you are at a higher P. Once you are called, you get a better wage if you're a higher P. Now what is that? That could be simply communication between you and your mainstream bosses are better. You follow instructions better. He is happier with you working, and that happier could be, pejorative in some senses as well, but for all of those reasons, you get a better remuneration. And then the chi is a composite of many things. Minority-specific public goods, minority discrimination. So minority discrimination is negative, minority-specific public goods are positive. That depends on how many minority people are in the state. Now, why does that not depend on dispersion? Honest answer, math would become a mess. Dishonest answer. Have you ever seen World Cup matches in the United States? Indians and Pakistanis become the best of friends as long as we are playing against Australia. And I'm not making this up. I'm not making this up. So our perceived distance between each other goes down when we're in a completely alien, well, not completely alien, but sufficiently alien environment. We're going to use that argument to drop. So in principle, I could have a dispersion measure there as well. That would make my life analytically very complicated. Dropped it, kept it simple. You guys can shoot me if you want to, but that's what I did. That's what we did. Okay. All right. Our final and formal analysis has two limitations. It assumes that when I'm maximizing, I'm just maximizing for myself. So that's myopia. And hey, people can go there. Can't they come back? I'll talk about coming back a little later. You can, but you most probably won't. That kind of result. So reverse migration is a concern that I have to address. We want to clarify the diverse nature of possible equilibrium minority assimilation trajectories. And if you look at this picture one more time, basically the three simplest things that will come to your mind is gradually the blue space clears out and everybody goes to the green space. I call that complete assimilation with the mainstream. Yeah.
So when you go to the green space, what P do you land at?
Exactly where you were. Thank you. Exactly where you were. Because you see, I should explain this little arrow over there. That means you land up at your same position. Now if you get a culture shift chance, it's obvious that you're not going to go this way, you're only going to go forward. So I didn't even draw the other arrow. But the assumption is you jump from your position to your position. That is why any chance you get to improve your position before jumping is a good thing. You get a higher probability, and once you land up there, you get a higher wage, and all of that sort of reinforces each other. Okay, so we talk about complete assimilation in the village. None of us goes, all of us stays back in the village, and we come closer to each other. Complete assimilation in the city. Over time, sequentially, first the most leftward guys jump, then leftward or rightward, depends on where you're looking at this thing. And then slowly the whole space clears out. We are, of course, most interested in the last one, which would basically say that, hey, unfortunately, we are born within the ethnicity subculture very strongly. We're not going to take a risk. We're going to stay here. And if that doesn't give us a city job, so what? We just get a reasonably high return over here. And these guys clear out, and so I get two clumps, one over there and one over there. And that's my fragmented assimilation. We want to identify model parameters. So see, we want to explain two things. That there can be multiple equilibria, and then there are certain model parameters which will sort of force towards some specific kind of equilibrium. Study the different impacts of fragmented assimilation on minority welfare, and it's all going to be sad. Fragmented assimilation is going to be really bad. In other words, I'll give you lots. So what we do is theoretical, analytical solving of the puzzle, and also lots of simulations. We run lots of simulations. And the simulations basically show that in most cases, the two clumps would be better off if they joined up eventually in either one of the two locations. Doesn't matter. So they are worse off because they are fractured. But they are fractured as a consequence of their parents' choices. So in some senses, there's not much they can do about it. Okay. Verify the robustness of the conclusions to the possibility of minority reverse migration and progeny welfare concerns. I give myself 25 minutes, and I will struggle. Cut me off. Whenever you feel free, cut me off. All right. These are the easy parts. What is equilibrium complete assimilation, and when can it occur? Well, this is the initial distribution, let's say, of masses. Equilibrium complete assimilation will occur when all of us come together and none of us go that side. Okay? And that's complete assimilation in V. And as luck would have it, this is the only case where we can give you a necessary and a sufficient condition as to when this is going to happen. And to get that necessary and sufficient condition, this is an important result. Suppose none of us could migrate. Migration was not an option. To go there was not an option. Then give me, and this is, once I say it, it's sort of obvious. Give me the median position of this initial distribution. If there may be two median positions, give me any one median position of this distribution. I can write down an equilibrium where the convergence is at that median position. Median positions are very important. Median in terms of, I am at a cultural position at which on my left are less than half people and on my right are less than half people. So that result is helpful and important. In a minority generation V, if C migration is impossible, then there can be equilibrium long-run minority agglomeration at any median culture position of the inherited culture distribution. Recognize, I should have clarified this. Every time a generation is coming in, it's coming in with that thing which is determined by their parents, not by them. They're taking that as given and then they're trying to move. Okay. And that median culture position, I'll use this notation, capital P of capital M. What that will tell me, give me, is a necessary and sufficient condition. Take any generation, and this is important. Okay, this is something I'll spend 2 seconds on. Conditions for complete assimilation in the city. I can give you stories, I can't give you a tight result. Okay. And one can't prove that nobody else can give you a tight result in this model, but I think that proof exists somewhere. Okay. So what I'm going to do here is, I'm going to say that suppose you do have a necessary or a sufficient condition for one kind of assimilation. To you, as a policymaker or a guy who's interested in the welfare of all of these things, is there a way of finding this out? Or do you need to actually know the entire data which is sort of capsuled in the expressions that I give you? Our approach is that in some cases, what you can say is, I don't know mu, I don't know the parameter values, but presumably residents know. I'm going to assume residents know. I can pick residents and say, I'll ask them the question, if you anticipated this to happen at the end of migration, where would you like to be? And with a finite number of questions and answers of that kind, I can recover the necessary and sufficient conditions. And I can answer the question, okay, from here on, this is what's going to happen. So that's one little thing we can do. Here it's very simple. Let me get to that, and then I'll run out of time, so I'll stop. But so what am I doing? I'm taking a cutoff generation. That generation inherits culture distribution, and I've taken a very simple symmetric bell-shaped culture distribution. And what does that culture distribution do? It implies that if all of us stayed back in the village according to this culture distribution, in other words, we stayed where our parents put us, what would the V payoff look like? And I draw the V. And it would look like a mountain. Why would it look like a mountain? Because the median position is over there, so those guys will be the highest. Now I ask, take that median position and let's collapse all the people towards that generation after generation after generation. The V payoff will change. I've taken such a simple case that here the V payoff will just peak more. That's all that's going to happen. But if I took a little bit of a heterogeneity in this red line, the V payoff can tilt. Okay? There's a unique result which says that because of my dispersion functions, the endpoints of the V payoffs will get equalized or tend to get equalized. If that needs a tilt that way, that's the way the tilt will happen. If that needs a tilt another way, that's the way the tilt will happen. Which basically tells me that I have a clean result which says the following. Starting from any t, there will exist an equilibrium trajectory leading to complete assimilation in V, if and only if my V, I'm at t, my V at the starting point and my V at the ending point, and now what is the ending point where everybody has converged, are always greater than C. So these two n things are greater than C. What's happening in the middle? Sorry. What's happening in the middle? Sorry, I should have gone the other way. Sorry. What's happening as I converge? There's a monotonic movement of V. So the min will determine whether I will migrate or not. So in other words, if I don't migrate at the starting point, and my V keeps on going up as people converge, I'm never going to migrate. Or I don't want to migrate at the starting point, but as V converges, it converges in such a way that it sort of incentivizes me to migrate. So this min condition, if it's satisfied for all t, I'm done. I'm going to get complete assimilation in V. This is of course the easiest result to get, and it doesn't say much, except that it gives me a necessary and sufficient condition. But actually, it does help me in a way. I'll get to that in a second. Okay. Now think about, in this picture, I want to spend one more time, think about, how can there be multiple equilibria? Think about it for a second. I've got an initial V function, I've got a final V function. They're all greater than CP0. What is CP0? My city pair at P if I'm the only guy who's migrated and nobody else is migrated. But the thing is that I'm never telling you that CP with a higher measure does not cross. So if it does cross, I'll have another expectation that a bunch of people will go, and therefore I will go. Okay? So even though the way the picture is drawn, this might give you a condition for uniqueness, it doesn't. It just tells you that you have a necessary and sufficient condition for this to be one equilibrium, not the only equilibrium. I have no result which will guarantee an only equilibrium. Fair enough. This one I said, this what will happen, this is completed simulation in C, so over time everybody's going to grow over there. And recognize something, as Anirban asked, when they go, they will go to their position. Over time, the progeny will just hop, hop, hop and end up over there. So that's why the big glob is over there. You're killing me. Okay, I'll try my best. I'll try my best. Okay. And I'll just give you a picture even though I don't have a tight result for the following reason. I draw, right skewed. This is where I get completely confused. You've got to stand from the location of the bloody PPT and figure out whether this is right skewed or left skewed. So this is right skewed, okay? And so why have I taken a right skewed? Because I want people to be pretty close to the city to begin with. And then I've taken something. I've taken a V function to be very flat. What does that mean? That dispersion measure is not that important. As long as there is a bunch of people in the city, in the village, doesn't matter whether they're next door or 2 doors away. What does that imply? Recognize something. If V was a horizontal line and the C function was increasing as more and more people migrated, there would always be an equilibrium where everybody migrated. Okay. Now that's a very strong sufficient condition. I don't need that. But that's the only clean result I can give you. Okay. So as people migrate, this almost flat V keeps on going down, and people migrate more, and eventually everybody gets the hell out. You actually don't need everybody to migrate, by the way. You need everybody to move to a position where eventually the progeny will migrate for sure. Okay. Never mind. I am getting panicky over here. Now, fragmented assimilation. Now, this is the heart of the paper, and there is no way I can do it in 5 minutes, so I won't even try. What will happen, verbally I can tell you this. One thing that can happen is, in a particular generation, that red line denotes a fracture. All these guys will assimilate in the V economy, and these guys, given the opportunity to migrate, will migrate. Okay? And there'll be a sort of a split between the two. And then, intertemporally, that split position itself can change, can move around. It doesn't have to be a stationary split. Okay. Furthermore, that's not the only way this can happen. You can have the split for 5 generations, and the split vanishes, and everybody stays in V. That's fine. The fact that in the first 5 generations people got out gives me fragmented assimilation. So fragmented assimilation can happen in many different ways. Coming up with a necessary and sufficient condition is impossible. I come up, or we come up with something we call, what do we call it? It'll come up. I forget. Okay. So the story, okay. So I'm not going to give you a result here, but I'm going to say 2 things and move on. even though I don't give you a formal result, because I have the pictures for V assimilation and C assimilation, my intuition is that this picture has to be different, and different from both of them in different dimensions. And that's what I'm going to play with. So I'm going to say, I'm going to now take a left skewed distribution. Right skewed distribution is on my right hand side. Which means what? A whole bunch of people, very traditional. Okay? And these not so much. Generates a V function, something like that. So this is definitely not a flat V function. This is definitely a skewed V function, but it's skewed in a particular way compared to complete assimilation in V. Okay. Now I'm going to take a C function which rises pretty fast. In other words, if you got a higher P, you got a higher wage. You got lots of returns from going to the city. Because of this crossover, I'm certainly going to get migration to begin with. What does that migration do? That migration pushes down the blue curve, pushes up the green curve, and sort of makes the blue curve peak a little bit more steep. Because right now, why is this guy going to gain? Because some of these guys who are not going to go are going to come closer to him. That's how the V function will move. That's how the C function will move. And if this happens, and this is impossible telling graphically, this may get entrenched and that may get entrenched, and the process might stop in the middle. That's why you've got the split. You've got the split of two sides going to the two positions. I'll give 5 minutes and stop. I'll keep to my word. I'll just do the impact and I'll stop. But before I do the impact, there is a formal, minimal, sufficient condition for this to happen, which we present at the end, which I won't have time to get to. But the logic of that formal, sufficient condition is very interesting. I need 4 questions. Acha, by the way, I'm trying to determine the structure of a dynamic trajectory by asking questions of a single generation. Please remember that. I don't have the luxury to keep coming back and asking these guys questions. So I have 4 questions to ask of a particular generation. And if the answer to all those 4 questions are yes, I will conclude that I've got my minimal sufficient condition for there being at least one trajectory which will lead to fragmented assimilation. That we can do. And that's the max we can do up to this point. What are the bad welfare implications? The bad welfare implications are that there is utility poverty. So in other words, if I merge the blue and the green blob in one place, the utility of everybody would be higher. Okay? So everybody is losing from this splurge. Of course, utility inequality, there's no guarantee that the utilities of these guys. Now, the ranking of the utility inequality could go either way, depending on how many people have moved to how many locations. So I don't know anything about the ranking. But there'll be utility inequality, and of course there will be extreme polarization, both of utility and of culture. So now to prove, see what happens is this proof is easy because everybody will incessantly move rightwards. This proof, and I wish Anuj was here to take credit for it, you could circle. So once everybody targets one and goes that way, the next period somebody targets something different and comes back. All we can say is that there'll be one where that won't happen. There'll be at least one where that won't happen. So it's a bit of a big deal to clarify that yes, you're going to get cultural polarization. Okay. Don't be worried. I'm going to take more than 2, but not much more. I have this slide, and this one I like, but this is sort of useless. You can have hysteresis, so what happens to my offsprings are history dependent. Okay? So pulling apart of locational siblings is possible. Two guys born at the same position in the same place in a particular generation, and then they get pulled apart in different directions. Reversal of parent-offspring assimilation goals and outcomes is possible. The parent was dying to go to the city and start a new life. That opportunity did not realize. But the economy changed in such a way that the son said, I'm going inwards. I am not going out. So two minority members born at a common position P, I don't even need to read this out. I think I've told you what I mean. I am not going to get away from this particular clique. We are thrilled to address a key idea, which we think is a key idea in Harif Qureshi's My Son the Fanatic. And if you haven't seen My Son the Fanatic, please go see it. It's very hard to see, actually. I don't know where you'd see it, but still. And the last one, bring in a government. It's very concerned to improve the lot of the minority. So it starts affirmative action. What does it do? It reduces the discrimination stuff that's going on. Recognize what's happening. I have a path. On that path, the government at some point is trying to hit it. What will happen depends on where we are in the path. Bad things might happen, good things might happen. We can't ex ante say. So this is a result which says that it might be all in the timing. Consider a scenario in which the minority assimilation trajectory is moving towards complete assimilation. The government aims to strengthen the state's affirmative action policy and thereby raise the city payoff function. In order to bring about complete minority assimilation in the city, they want to merge the people. Success or failure of the policy change will depend critically on the current state of the ongoing transition path at which the policy is hitting that path. If the policy is implemented very late, there may be no change, just no change in the outcome. If it's implemented a bit late, something that would have otherwise stayed entirely in the village gets fractured into the city and the village, and that's not necessarily good news. That's not necessarily good news. But if a policy is implemented on the first generation, if you can very well achieve what you want to achieve. The larger is the policy intervention, if you want it to succeed, its scale has to be much larger. In other words, you have to push up the C function a lot in order to achieve the scale that you want it to achieve. Thank you.
We have time for some questions, a couple of quick questions.
Good afternoon, sir. Right. So this is just a brief clarificated question, and please forgive me if this is nothing but.
Don't. Go ahead.
Right. So I was curious if you'd taken into account any sort of resistance from the bunch of city dwellers to the agency and questions of migration, which reside with the migrants themselves.
It's bad enough that they discriminate. To stand up and say it's our birthright, I haven't taken it.
Thank you.
I don't think I should trivialize your question. It's a fair concern. It's a fair concern that resistance might come, but I haven't taken it.
Hi, I had a question. So I was wondering if, so for the city dwellers, if payoff is rising with P, right? So can there be no culture shift in the mainstream as well with more minorities, and then the P, they don't need to increase P every time?
Theoretically, that's possible. My presumption is that the mainstream is so huge that it's just a question of them accepting you. The question of you they becoming more acceptable to you, it's a fair question that they are drawn towards. Haven't done that. Haven't done that. If I did that, the details would change, but I don't think the basic story I'm telling you.
Yeah, I think the story will kind of hold.
Yeah. But I haven't done
Oh, thank you so much.
One last thing.
Yeah.
Sir, I just have a question to ask. I think you have been trying to, make it fit within the time. Many things have been left out. This is what I observe. First of all, I would love to read the entire paper.
Oh, that is where we disagree whether the final version has been produced or not.
Oh.
One says it has, the other says it hasn't.
Okay.
That's going to take some time.
All right. Now, the thing that I had to ask is, you said something regarding the Indian context, okay, right in the beginning.
Yeah.
Before you went into the
Yeah. I
city
think,
and the village and
no,
so
no,
on.
I think,
Do you have
I think,
any observation on this matter? Because this must
okay.
come up in the discussion.
I don't, so what do you think? So I asked friends of mine
Yes.
to look at, looking at inequality measures, subgroup inequality measures, polarization measures of the different Indian ethnicities, and over time is a undone and a very good research agenda. I think that I would unambiguously say that I am not the guy to do it, but it's worth doing. It's worth doing. And it doesn't only have to be religion. We could cut it along religion, we could cut it along ethnicity, rural, urban. But you see, our attempts have always been, are they better off than us or worse off than us? That's sort of the lumpy group versus that, the inside group heterogeneity, how that is evolving. I think it's a very worthwhile question to ask. It's a very, I think so. Okay? And especially because it says not only things about the Gini, it says something about the extent of polarization. And you could do that, tag that at one. So, is within ethnic group polarization increasing faster than the mainstream polarization? I don't know the answer to that question in any country. Forget India. So it's worth knowing that. It's worth knowing that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And could you please join me in thanking Professor Stan?
Thank you.